Welcome back to YourTown television program in Monterey. My name is Carol McKibben, and I am the director of a new Salinas history project. My guests today are Mr. Sherwood Darrington, the managing director of the Agricultural Land Trust in Salinas, and Mr. Pete Anderson, a sixth-generation Salinas resident. And we're talking about Salinas history. And in one fell swoop, in about the last 30 minutes, we've gone from the mid-19th century to the end of World War II. And now we're beginning to look at a moment in time when another transition takes place in Salinas. And that is the transition brought on by the federal government's interest in cities in the post-war era, which begins with the 1949 the 1949 Cities Act. It's a federal act that began to invest in cities that were so-called blighted, and a lot of federal funding going into preservation. The era of the 1960s and 70s was also an era of a new environmentalism, which became concerned both with environmental poisoning, and Silent Spring is a good example of the trigger for that, but also a concern about conservation and preservation. And I know Mr. Anderson's mom was an activist in Salinas, Ruth Anderson.
Right.
She ran for city council trying to blunt the forces of urban renewal that denied the Main Street a central place in Salinas history. And Mr. Darrington began in that period to be concerned about the population growth in Salinas that was encroaching on agricultural land. So by 1984, a turning point for both of you, I believe, the Agricultural Land Trust was organized. And I'd like you, Mr. Darrington, to tell us a little bit about the origins of the Land Trust and what its goals and mission are.
Yeah. In 1984, Louis Calcagno was on the Planning Commission for Monterey County, and Mark Del Piero was a supervisor for Monterey County during that time frame, and Ed DeMars was a planning director for Monterey County. And Louis Calcagno also served on the dairy board of the state. And he had a friend out of Marin County who served with him on that board, who had formed an agricultural land trust for Marin County.
Okay.
And so Louis brought that idea back to Monterey County, talked to the supervisor, Mark Del Piero, and they set up a public meeting for people to attend. And so my father wanted me to drive him over to the meeting. And so I did that, and they passed around his sign-up sheet, so who we know was there, so to speak, like. And about a week later, I got a request to be on their board of directors, and so that was the beginning of the Ag Land Trust.
What is a land trust?
The land trust actually holds development rights that have been transferred from farmland or rangeland off of the land, and they're held by the land trust and expunged and given to the public of California. So nobody owns any development rights.
So it's about about protecting the land from development, and by development you mean building apartments or housing or any shopping centers, any kind of use of the land that's not growing crops on it.
On that particular land forever.
Forever.
In
And if you have
perpetuity.
land and you want to donate it to the land trust, what do you do?
Well, you can contact the land trust, and that's where my office is. We have a website that people can look up and things of that nature. But the land trust also purchases the development rights off of some farm.
So you have funding. So you don't just donate it. You have funding.
Yes,
so you can certainly purchase.
Yes.
Okay.
So some of our easements are donated. About 30% are donated. 70% are purchased, and some are actually developed under a mitigation for converting other land into urban uses as well.
So you're protecting this land from just being part of the sprawl that's so common in much of Silicon Valley, which we are connected to.
Yeah. Right. And basically what our focus is not to prevent development, but to guide it onto the less productive farmland. And we have done that pretty well with Salinas, is growing to the northeast, and they annexed some 1,600 acres for future development for the town in the northeast. Gonzales has had some recent annexations on the east side of the town. And so the land, generally speaking, between Highway 101 or the railroad tracks and the Salinas River generally is the most productive farmland in Monterey County. That's true through the whole valley.
So this is not anti-growth.
No.
This is guided development. This is an effort to establish what land is worth preserving because it's still very productive, and what land might be used to accommodate a growing population. So you're not against population growth. You're not against development. What you're against is for the land to be good farmland being gobbled up and not used in a conscientious way.
Well, that's very true. There's about 4 locations in the entire world that have some similarity to Monterey County or in the Salinas Valley. And you know, the Nile River Valley in Egypt, there's one in Australia, one in South America, in Monterey County, that have the weather pattern, you know, where you can grow year round. You never lose a crop due to weather, and you have good soil here, and there's good soil in a lot of places in the world. There's been a lot of effort put into maintaining the water supply for irrigation, big investments in that, and future to come, more investments in that. And so we need to have a population base that recognizes the importance of agriculture, not only its history but its future, and also recognize that different people want to do different things. And so we're now seeing a new change coming on the horizon, where we're getting more high-tech, you know, discussion and involvement than what we have in the past here.
So what you want to see mindful development, and you want to see an appreciation for agriculture that moves us into the 21st century.
Yeah.
And as a, not contrast, but complement, Mr. Andresen is interested in the city itself and in understanding the value of the buildings and the streets and the history that goes into that, but also in terms of a productive future. It's not anti-development.
No.
Historic preservation is not anti-development.
No.
It's understanding how you make a city look positive, look good.
It's cognitive development.
Thank you.
It's
Okay.
it's for example, if you go down Capitol Street, there's a dip. Why is there a dip? The dip is that there used to be a river, a slough, a creek. There used to be so many frogs there that the people in Salinas didn't like the frogs. They used to complain about the frogs. So what has happened is when you drive through Salinas and you say, why is there a dip there? The dip there is for a reason. Why do we need to worry about earthquakes in that particular area? Because it's all fill.
Wow.
It's all landfill. Why are there houses back behind there that have their garages beneath the street. The reason is that they built into the riverbed by putting their garages underneath in the riverbed. If you go to the YMCA, you can see the same thing. That's why they flood, because nature's trying to find its prior levels. Another thing that very much concerns me is we have a rich multicultural heritage, and we need to remember the actual people who brought us here. There are many, many people, some of them mentioned in Steinbeck's work, but not by their actual names, but we have a fascinating history that very, very few people know about. In our rush to become a modern city, one of the things that we've kind of forgotten are the people who made it happen. For example, in front of Roosevelt School, there's a plaque. Those are the people who died from Salinas in World War I. Not Monterey County, just Salinas. They had names, they had families. That has echoed through time, and that very much affected our experience with the National Guard in World War II, and that experience echoed through time in the way we view community, multiculturalism, and why Salinas is the way it is. There's a reason why there's a tank at the cemetery. People should know why.
Why?
Because of the Bataan Death March, because of C Company, 194th Tank Battalion. It's not an M3 tank, it's an M6 tank, so it's not entirely realistic, but there's still a reason why people behave the way they do in Salinas.
Well, clearly, history is not written, does not happen in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Everything about the past contributes to the way we see the world in the present and the future.
Right.
So in the present, what are your respective goals for Salinas, given that you really are, from your roots, part of Salinas's important past? So what would you like to see happen in the city in the next decade to meet what you see as a problem in terms of remembering significant people and organizations and buildings? What would you like to see? What is your view of the city, and how is your work contributing to accomplishing that?
Well, the centenary of World War I and America's entry into World War I is April 6th. Founders Day at the first mayor's house over by the railroad station.
And you're going to be speaking about it.
I'll be speaking, but I'm not the main event. The main event is there. That's April 8th. That's on a Saturday.
Okay.
And it's over by the train station. And that provides us with an opportunity to put out the message that in the midst of all of this kind of, we were discussing earlier kind of the broken windows theory, how there's kind of a tendency in our society to be a little less civil and a little more angry, a little less reaching out and a little more insular. This provides us with a starting point to start reaching out to people who might not seem to be like us, but in fact probably are.
Scratch the surface.
Right.
And everyone contributed to this city.
Yes.
And continues to.
Yeah, my ancestors were immigrants.
Refugees.
Just as much as any other people's ancestors were immigrants. The only difference is a different place on the timeline.
Right.
So we have a chance to become a little more civil to each other and come closer together. So that's my goal.
And an admirable one.
Thank you.
Well, I look at Salinas' future, that there's a need to protect the agriculture industry.
Yes.
It has meant so much to the development of the town, and it shouldn't be paved over. And it'll change. The crops that are being grown here today may not be there in 5 years or 10 years or 20 or 100 years. But due to the combination of the land and the water and the weather, the management, and the labor, that's a business that generates $4.8 billion a year into the community. And when you look at the effect of that, it probably generates about $9 billion. And that's a big industry for Monterey County, the biggest industry for Monterey County.
Well, and another point is that it's not an industry like the car industry. Agriculture is about feeding the world. And we look at manufacturing towns now, Detroit, Cleveland, that have had to be completely transformed economically, because what they were doing in the 40s is not what they were doing today. So they've transformed from manufacturing cars to centers for medicine and education. And that's how they've built their economies. Salinas, on the other hand, is agricultural.
Right.
And both of you, I am hearing, agree that Salinas will always be agricultural and needs to respect not just its roots as an agricultural center, but understand that that's its future as well. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. Yes.
I know I'm talking to the converted. Yes.
Yeah, well, but we're in a unique place to reinvent ourselves, and that's what's different. A place like Detroit, unfortunately, cannot reinvent itself because what it had has moved on technologically.
Right.
So they're in a tough place. But Salinas can. One of the things that's interesting when you study the history of Salinas is how way out front technologically farming actually can be, because the railroads transformed it, the rise of the mechanical tractor transformed it, the rise of irrigation transformed it, and different cultures helped transform it by bringing in their habits. But the thing is, we can reinvent ourselves very successfully.
Well, and what you're talking about is a reinvention of, or a use of technology that makes the city more productive,
Right.
wealthier, not that people are leaving the city, but it's actually creating a much needed labor force. So people are drawn to Salinas. It's a destination. It's growing. And that's different than a lot of the places that I mentioned that are manufacturing towns that are losing population. So Salinas is increasing population, and how do we manage that? Well, Mr. Darrington's organization manages that by being very careful where that population is going. It should be directed to areas that are not fertile agricultural land, not the wealthiest, the richest agricultural land. And Mr. Anderson direct the population to preservation of the downtown structures. Don't just chop them all down to build new apartment buildings, right?
Yes.
Expand in a mindful way that enhances the city and moves it forward instead of throwing up our hands or trying to do something completely different. It seems like Salinas is on the same trajectory. It's just being improved.
Yes.
Any last thoughts? Last comments?
Come to Founders Day.
Come to Founders Day, April 8th.
April 8th.
Okay, we'll all be there.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson, you will be speaking.
Very short.
Well, I think you'll be the center of the star. Thank you both so much for joining me. I will reintroduce you, Mr. Sherwood Darrington, the Managing Director of the Agricultural Land Trust. You have a website, aglandtrust.org.
Yes.
And if you're interested, please investigate that. And Mr. Anderson, see you at Founders Day.
Founders Day.
Okay. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Carol McKibben. I'm the director of this new Salinas History Project. Very exciting. And I can't wait to see you both again at Founders Day.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.